それではこれより
We would like to start Subcommittee 3, Environmental Protection. The chair for this session is Dr. Kimiko Okabe. She's the director of Center for Biodiversity and Climate Change, Forestry and Forest Products Research Institute. Dr. Okabe, please. Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Kimiko Okabe from Forestry and Forest Productions Research Institute. One Health is for health of animal, human, and environment. I think everyone is aware of that. With the COVID-19, the risk of the zoonosis must be minimized. I think we all became aware of how important it is to control the zoonosis. In the ecosystem, there are a lot of pathogens that we are not aware of. However, at the same time, the environment has a function to protect and hold such pathogens from releasing intact. But lately, we are wondering if that function is actually weakening or maybe being lost. As a result of that, this zoonosis trend is actually an environmental issue. So in order to maintain sustainable society, we must seriously think about environmental issues. Today, we have 5 experts, and they will be discussing what they have done and what they are doing currently and what they are expecting in the future. So the very first topic from UNEP, Program Management Officer from United Nations Environmental Program, Asia and the Pacific Office. Dr. Makiko Yoshiro is going to talk about UNEP's effort on strengthening environmental dimensions of the One Health approach.
Thank you for the opportunity to present on our work focused on strengthening environmental dimensions of the One Health approach. In this presentation, I will talk briefly about the definition of One Health, provide updates on the recent developments at the international level, and also share some information on the initiatives UNEP is currently implementing in collaboration with partners in Asia. As you know, the current COVID-19 pandemic is a reminder that there are important connections between human, animal, and environmental health. We are increasingly aware that the stress on our environment, such as biodiversity loss, pollution, and climate change, can increase risks associated with many aspects of health, including zoonotic diseases. And in this context, the discussions on One Health, which traditionally have mainly focused on the prevention and control of infectious diseases at the human-animal interface, have started to address environmental drivers of health. And globally, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, FAO, World Organization for Animal Health, OIE, and the World Health Organization, WHO, have been working together for many decades and advocating for a One Health approach to the prevention, detection, and control of diseases and to address issues such as antimicrobial resistance. However, recognizing the importance of strengthening environmental dimensions of One Health, since 2020, UNEP has been engaged in a tripartite partnership to strengthen environmental dimensions. And the slide shows the operational definition introduced by the One Health high-level expert panel, supported by the 4 organizations. And the definition states that One Health is an integrated, unifying approach that aims to sustainably balance and optimize the health of people, animals, and ecosystems. And it recognizes that the health of humans, animals, plants, and the wider environment, including ecosystems, are closely linked and interdependent. So you can see that it focuses very much on strengthening the interface between human, animal, and environmental health. The definition also highlights the importance of working across sectors and disciplines and taking a whole of the society approach in addressing health threats and environmental degradation and contributing to sustainable development. So One Health is really a collaborative effort of multiple disciplines working together locally, nationally, regionally, and globally to promote and ensure the health of people, livestock, wildlife, and the environment. As you may know, recent reports released by UNEP in collaboration with the International Livestock Research Institute, as well as by the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES, have highlighted that pandemics can be caused by activities that bring people into direct contact and conflict with the animals carrying pathogens. The reports also highlighted that habitat destruction and deforestation, changes in wildlife populations due to climate change, ecosystem degradation, uncontrolled expansion of agriculture, intensive farming, mining and infrastructure development, as well as the exploitation of wild species have all contributed significantly to the crossover of diseases from wildlife to people or from wildlife to domesticated livestock. IPBES report has also warned that pandemics like COVID-19 could occur more frequently unless we scale up efforts to stop destroying nature. To minimize such risks in the future, urgent actions are needed to make sure that the post-COVID-19 recovery process will not lead to negative impacts on the environment, such as pressures on biodiversity and ecosystems and climate change. And here, strengthening environmental dimensions of One Health is central to these efforts. So what actions are needed? The report issued by UNEP and International Livestock Research Institute highlights various policy options to reduce the risk of future zoonotic pandemics, and I have listed some of them here. For example, there is a need to raise awareness of health and environmental risks and the importance of prevention. Improving health governance by engaging environmental stakeholders is essential. And building scientific knowledge and information on the environmental dimensions of zoonotic diseases, phasing out unsustainable agricultural practices is important because land use change is a major risk factor for zoonotic diseases. Developing and implementing stronger biosecurity measures is also important, and building capacity among health stakeholders to incorporate environmental dimensions of health and further mainstreaming and implementing One Health approaches is also essential. And the need for strengthening environmental dimensions of One Health is increasingly recognized at the global level. For example, the need for a comprehensive approach to One Health was highlighted in the G7 communique, which took place in June last year. The G20 Health Ministers' Declaration, adopted in Rome in September last year, specifically talked about the need for strengthening the One Health related to antimicrobial resistance, food systems, and environmental health. And it also states that issues related to climate change, ecosystem degradation, increased encroachment into natural systems, and loss of biodiversity should be addressed through the One Health approach, leveraging the technical leadership of the WHO, FAO, OIE, and UNEP. And also, a new global plan of action on biodiversity and health is currently under development through the Convention on Biological Diversity related processes, and is expected to be endorsed and integrated into the new post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework to be adopted this year. As mentioned earlier, UNEP has been engaged since 2020 in the Tripartite Partnership for One Health, and currently the 4 organizations are in the process of developing a comprehensive global plan of action for One Health under the guidance of the One Health High-Level Expert Panel. And the objective of this plan is to mainstream and operationalize One Health at global, regional, and national levels, support countries in establishing and achieving national targets and priorities, mobilize investment, promote a whole-of-society approach, and enable collaboration, learning, and exchange across regions, countries, and sectors. And under the action plan, currently 6 action tracks are covered, as indicated on this slide. And from UNEP side, we are working closely with our partners in ensuring that environmental dimensions are sufficiently captured under the action plan. Within UNEP, there has been increasing focus on the efforts related to One Health, and our new medium-term strategy for 2020 and 2025 clearly outlines UNEP's mandate and strategic directions to strengthen environmental dimensions of One Health. And based on this, UNEP is currently in a process of developing a program on One Health, which will be implemented in close collaboration with partners. And in terms of our work in the region, the first area we focus on relates to strengthening knowledge base and facilitating dialogues related to the interface between human, animal, and environmental health. And we are currently developing a report which assesses the risk of emerging zoonosis with pandemic potential in the region and provide policy options that could help the region in mitigating the risk of future pandemics. We have also been facilitating the regional level policy dialogues, and in October last year, we held a regional session of the UN Science Policy Business Forum on the environment, which prominently featured the issues related to the prevention of the risks of future pandemics in the region. We are also focusing on better readiness and rapid response systems for zoonotic pathways and risks. We have been undertaking the assessment of the status of the biosecurity systems and measures in India, Laos PDR, and Vietnam. And the preliminary findings of the assessment indicate that there is a strong need for better coordination between human, animal health, and environmental sectors in further strengthening national biosecurity systems and measures. For example, the assessment highlighted that regulatory systems, laboratory biosafety systems, and surveillance systems related to human, animal health, and environmental sectors are currently compartmentalized. And environmental agencies are not so actively engaged in dealing with threats that originate from the environment, and also in introducing measures that have impacts on the environment, such as issues related to waste management. And assessments also highlighted that the detection of possible zoonosis based on environmental surveillance is currently very limited, and the assessments or studies to define possible indicator species or specific targets, such as animal vectors, are also limited. So these aspects need to be further addressed in the future, and we hope that the findings of the assessments could feed into designing of future initiatives to strengthen biosecurity systems and measures in these countries. UNEP has also undertaken a review of regulations on wet markets in Vietnam last year. The review highlighted that although the One Health approach can be effective in managing the health risks arising from market activities, there is currently no specific plan or activity that support such approach in the management of wet markets. The review also highlighted that there is a need for further research on amending specific standards, technical guidelines on monitoring, detecting and handling risk factors related to food safety, environment, and health from animal products, especially wild animals. Also, the review highlighted the need to strengthen capacity to enforce policies and regulations on food safety, environment, and public health protection related to activities at wet markets. UNEP is also part of the new project called Safety Across Asia for the Global Environment. It's called SAFE. And this project is led by the UN Office on Drugs and Crime and funded by the European Union, implemented in collaboration with FAO. The initiative covers selected countries in the region and focuses on mitigating the risk of new zoonotic diseases within wildlife keeping facilities and markets through risk assessments, application of risk mitigation measures, and supporting a regional policy dialogue. UNEP will be actively engaged in the provision of regulatory and advisory support to the governments in managing and phasing out high-risk facilities and locations, and also supporting regional dialogues and cooperation related to biosafety for the prevention of zoonotic diseases in the future. And finally, I'd like to end my presentation by mentioning that adapting a One Health approach with strong focus on environmental dimensions is key for preventing as well as responding to zoonotic disease outbreaks and pandemics. And in these efforts, active engagement of partners involved in human, animal health, and environmental sectors is essential. We very much look forward to collaborating with partners in these efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have heard the video presentation from Ms. Yashiro, who talked about UNEP's efforts and initiatives enhancing an environmental aspect efforts in the area of One Health.
Next speaker is Ms. Kanako Morita, who's a senior researcher at Forestry and Forest Products Research Institute. Her presentation is entitled Interlinkages Among Biodiversity, Climate Change, and Health. Ms. Morita, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? So I will talk about the interlinkages among biodiversity, climate change, and health. First, on the environment and the health. And there is a diverse climate changes such as biodiversity, climate change, air pollution, chemicals are very much related to the human health. Centered around WHO, they have come up with 500 action plans to reduce the death by 25%. So a report was published last year, and various actions, if they are to be implemented fully, then that can prevent 25% of the death in the world. So integrating the actions on the environment and health is quite important. On the other hand, the policy and academic discussions to discuss the environment and health is still lacking. What's shown here is what was announced by Global Economic Forum and the Global Risk Report. This is the 2020 version before COVID-19 pandemic took place. There are various stakeholders in the business community and that are knowledgeable about these risks. So various experts and leaders have answered the questionnaire survey to recognize the risks. And back in 2020, the failure of climate action and extreme weather, biodiversity loss, these were considered to be highly likely to happen, and the impact would be quite huge. But then the infectious diseases were not considered to be of high risk. On the other hand, this is the 2021 version. The climate change, biodiversity, the importance of environmental issues continue to be heightened. On the other hand, what was not recognized before, the infectious diseases, were considered to be highly likely to occur, and also it will have a global impact. That recognition has improved. So what I will talk about is to integrating, what I'm going to talk about is the need to integrate the biodiversity, climate change, and health in policy, from the policy and academic perspective. There may be some overlap, but there's One Health, that is the theme of the theme, and what is considered an important concept, nature-based solutions. I would also like to touch upon that as well. First, on sustainable development goals and climate change and biodiversity being interlinked. I'd like to talk about that. In 2015, 17 goals, environment, society related goals were adopted as sustainable development goals. And if you look at that, there are climate change and biodiversity. The environment is linked with the health issues and the urban life related issue and the sustainable food production issue. If these challenges are resolved, then that can have a good impact. So these are very much linked with various other issues. And if you look at the relationship between climate change and biodiversity, for both, these have indirect causes such as institutional factors, etc. And then there's the issue of contamination of land and land use. That has led to the loss of that biodiversity and the climate change. So those are major causes behind the challenges. And for both climate change and loss of biodiversity would have a huge impact on the quality of life of human beings. So in that sense, the climate change and the biodiversity are very much linked. Now, looking at the relationship between climate change and the human activities have led to the increase in global or greenhouse gases, and that has had impact on loss of biodiversity, also causing various health issues. One point I'd like to discuss is vector-borne diseases. That's also caused by human activities. Regarding climate change and biodiversity, currently, as economies make recovery from COVID-19, and there is a better, more sustainable way to recover. So that discussion has been going on. And as part of that, and this is considered to be an important issue. For instance, OECD, what they're aiming for in terms of better recovery, if you look at that diagram, there's the well-being and in the middle. And then in order to achieve that, climate change and biodiversity, the environmental issues need to be considered as well. Otherwise, it cannot be central theme, a goal cannot be achieved. So One Health and nature-based solutions related to that, what is the relationship between those and the optimal discussion? This is the schematic diagram of that. After COVID-19 pandemic, and there's a better recovery and green recovery, which is a more environmentally friendly. By having such discussions, if you look at the environmental related conventions regarding One Health and the Convention of Biodiversity, there's heightened discussion. Also, there's IPBES, which puts together the scientific based evidence. There's a discussion that is ongoing there. And then as for nature-based solution, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and Convention on Biodiversity are very much related to that. And so I would like to engage in discussion touching upon these two conventions as well. Regarding One Health, other doctors have talked about this. I'll keep it simple. So the human-caused or human-made changes in environment can lead to spillover of zoonosis. So the causes of man-made changes in the environment have led to zoonosis. So there are environmental issues behind zoonosis, so we need to resolve the environment. As was mentioned in Yashiro-san's presentation at G7 meeting, and they emphasized the importance of One Health. As was just mentioned, OIE, FAO, WHO, and UNEP were added. So they made a statement that they will support the collaboration. So One Health is emphasized. And One Health is also gaining attention in terms of international cooperation and financing. For instance, the World Bank that funds the projects in the developing countries, the animal, human, and ecosystem health needs to be considered, or they made a statement to consider that important. And Japanese government related or Japanese government and private sector companies are starting to take this into account to set up a fund with the consideration on the environment and also sustainable development bonds investment have been taken up as well. Now, regarding nature-based solutions, as I mentioned earlier, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and from Convention on Biodiversity perspectives, this is very important. Put very simply, the societal issues are to be resolved, and in that process, the nature perspective should be taken in so that it will benefit the well-being of human beings and the biodiversity. In terms of specific approaches of nature-based solutions, the recovery of ecosystems or the mitigation and reduction of the greenhouse gases, adaptation and mitigation, the nature perspective should be incorporated. So there's discussion on that front as well. As for nature-based solutions, the concept itself, what's called IOCN and Europe are the main drivers of the discussion. So it is starting to gain some traction, but in Asia, including Japan, it is still not fully discussed. So last year, nature-based solutions in Asia was put together. I can't go into the detail, but in Asia, including Japan, the measures that would mitigate and adapt to climate change and the green infrastructure utilizing ecosystem and eco disaster risk reduction are being discussed. But the collaboration among stakeholders is indispensable, and also interdisciplinary strategies are needed as well. Just like with One Health, the nature-based solutions are emphasized at the G7 meeting as well. So it says, working intensively to increase the quantity of finance for climate mitigation adaptation actions, including for nature-based solutions. So there's heightened level of discussion. Now, in the context of nature-based solutions and international cooperation, there's what's called RED+. This is reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation in developing countries. Climate change framework convention. Under that framework, this was discussed. So in developing countries, there's deforestation and forest degradation. So as that happens, the greenhouse gases will go up. So in order to reduce that, the developed countries is to provide support to developed countries. If these measures are being taken in developing countries, and then at a relatively low cost, they can contribute to reducing the greenhouse gases. So from developed countries and developing countries, these are measures that can be beneficial. So it's gaining a lot of attention. Apart from that, in the finance industry, there have been some developments and there as well. I can't go into the detail either, but the climate-related risks and nature-related risks were to be taken seriously by the private sector financial institutions, and the financial disclosure should be made. What that means is, in relation to climate change-related risks, there are economic and financial impact coming from this issue, and towards decarbonization, there are various policies to be implemented, and there's transition to new technologies. So unless you're prepared, private sector companies and financial institutions will be impacted heavily. So from that perspective, there are mechanisms to be introduced preparing for climate change. Applying similar concepts to biodiversity related, there are various risks for financial institutions and private sector companies, and that needs to be taken care of. So there's a discussion, nature positive economy related discussion is ongoing as well. So under One Health and the nature-based solutions, I talked about those two concepts for both. But from One Health perspective, these two need to be integrated. On the other hand, the international discussion that's taking place tends to discuss these two separately. So regarding the environment and health, in relation to taking up One Health approach, the collaboration with scientific community is also needed. Lastly, towards sustainable society in their sectors, there have been discussions on societal changes. So in that, against that backdrop, various stakeholders need to go into the same direction towards societal change. So in my mind, the environment and the health are still not well linked, but from policy level, scientific level, in the environment and health areas towards the societal changes, hopefully there will be more joint discussions. That is all from me. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Morita. So from Ms. Morita, and there was biodiversity, climate change, and health. There's a very strong linkage, and also better recovery from COVID-19. From that perspective, it was raised that it is important to recognize that linkages. Thank you very much.
次のご講演者をご紹介したいと
Now
思い
let
ます。
me introduce the next speaker.
3番目の講演者は
The third speaker
野生生物保全協会
is going to be
プログラム
is from Wildlife Conservation Society, and he is also a professor at the University of Veterinary Medicine at Vienna, Austria. And Dr. Chris Walter is going to give us a lecture on nature positive solutions must drive One Health pandemic prevention.
Dr. Walter, thank you for joining us. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good evening from the Bronx. I hope everyone can hear me. Is that right? Someone confirm that? Yes? No? Thank you. All right. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm going to build on what the speakers before me already have touched on. So I'm going to talk about nature positive solutions. And I'm going to make this a bit quite simple, actually. First of all, I want to let's talk about the world we're living in at the moment. We have 4 major crises at the moment, I would say. We have climate change, as we've just heard a lot about climate change, biodiversity loss, a public health crisis, obviously, and then the 4th crisis, I think, is something we mustn't neglect at all, is a crisis of inequity across the entire globe. So building on that, and all 4 of these crises have similar drivers And any solution we drive for, or any solution we tackle, will have co-benefits in the other areas. Now, just let me talk about quickly. Come from a conservation organization, Wildlife Conservation Society. So we're based in New York, but we have offices in about 60 countries around the world. And you sort of wonder why a conservation NGO talks about health. Now, we've got our health program has existed for more than 100 years, and we're actually one of the One Health founders. More than 20 years ago, the Wildlife Conservation Society was a author, so to say, of the very famous Manhattan Principles on One Health, which is sort of the basis for most of the other discussions and subsequent discussions on One Health. And the really good thing about an organization like ours is that we are multidisciplinary at the core, of course. But we also work with governments across all sectors. So that puts us into quite an interesting position, because we're actually working on the ground in very, very different parts of the world. So what do we talk about with Nature Positive? We just heard about nature-based solutions, but at this famous meeting of the G7 in Cornwall, which the poor guys, they did promise a lot, of course. They promised us One Health, they promised us nature-based solutions, but they also promised that the world is going to become net zero and nature positive. And the idea here is that in parallel to the UN Climate Convention's net zero emissions goal, a nature positive position by 2030 would be to halt all nature loss by that time. And obviously that is also a very, very ambitious goal. The idea is that we'd be going through a bottleneck now. We would stop losing biodiversity, and we would have a full recovery by 2050, 2100. So as you can imagine, this is another one of these very, very ambitious goals. But as has been pointed out, as we talk about recovery from COVID, this is something to keep in mind. We cannot have a recovery from COVID at the cost of biodiversity or climate change mitigation measures or inequities, for example. But let me just keep this. One Health has obviously addresses so much more than just infectious diseases. But today, I really want to use the SARS-CoV-2 as an example. So keep it in a pandemic context. And this pandemic has made it really clear, because of the global interconnectedness that we have, that we can never view or never again view our own health in isolation from the health of anyone else on this planet. I think that's pretty clear, and the other speakers have already said that today. I'm also not going to go into talking about what zoonosis is. Just, the key fact is that 3/4 of all emerging infectious disease have their origin in wildlife, in nature. So we need to obviously work on this interface. And the other thing that's important to understand is that the intensity and frequency of these novel infectious disease agents is increasing. And I think one of the really good examples for that is, if you just look at Ebola virus disease, first reported in 1976, and there have been 13 outbreaks since 1976. 9 of those have happened in the last 13 years alone, and 6 since 2018. And as you can remember, the West African outbreak was, of course, of a much more extensive scale than anything that we'd seen before with this disease. So it's increasing in frequency and in impact, of course. And let me not forget, I'm a veterinarian by training, and I think we often forget many times the other pandemics which are going on at the same time. We're worried, of course, and rightly so, about SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19, but at the same time, we have African swine fever, which has rushed from Africa across Asia, and that is impacting domestic pig populations, but also wild pig and endangered pig populations across Southeast Asia. And then the second big pandemic, so to say, we have at the moment is the peste du petit ruminant, a livestock disease which impacts goat and sheep and the livelihood of people who have goat and sheep, but also eradicates many endangered wildlife species in its way. So let's not forget, we have the human pandemics, but we obviously have those of livestock importance as well. Let us return to SARS-CoV-2. So this was obviously not what would be called a black swan event. Yes, this is something we knew about. Everyone had warned that this was going to come at the latest in 2018. As you remember, the WHO put on its list of priority diseases the disease X or pathogen X. Obviously, we could have prevented this, but we didn't. So what do we know about the origins? As we already talked about several times today, so the zoonotic origin. It's not quite clear where the spillover, how the spillover happened. There's a lot of controversy about it. This is not the place now to go through that. But if you've been following this carefully in the last few months, the information has really solidified that there's been a spillover from obviously an ancestral bat virus with probably an intermediary species into humans and then spread from there. What's really important to remember though, we were really focused on the spillover event the old time, but now in the last, what would I say, the last 3-4 months, there's been a lot more discussions about spillback as well and maintaining this infection chain, especially with white-tailed deer here in North America. I don't know if you follow this in Japan, but here, some of the areas, white-tailed deer, 40% or more of these white-tailed deer that are sampled are positive for SARS-CoV-2. Just now in New York, last week on Staten Island, which is not very far from here, they sampled white-tailed deer that were, I think 20% were positive for Omicron. So with the spillback is becoming a big issue. And then obviously you all heard about the hamsters in the pet trade in Hong Kong, with the Delta variant being introduced into Hong Kong. So these spillovers is nothing special. These viruses are not particularly unique. As we've started looking more in the last 24 months, these COVID-like highly related viruses have been found in Laos, been found in Thailand. This was a nice publication came out of Japan as well, and so on. So this is nothing so surprising. It's not only in bats. Let's be very clear. If you think about it, the hedgehogs with MERS-related COVID were also described just recently. Now, it's obviously not about pathogens. It's all about interphases. In the nature, we obviously have pathogens which are circulating, completely innocuously, causing no disease. They don't do any harm. And the moment we start changing that, when we put infrastructure into nature, a road, we provide an opportunity for these pathogens to spill over. First of all, they spill over into humans, they can spill over into wildlife, into livestock. And then, of course, from any place in the world, they're very, very quickly anywhere else in the world. So Times Square or in Tokyo or wherever, we know that. And this is a hazard. We know about this hazard, but the problem is what drives the risk. And the things that drive the risk for this emergence is, of course, land use change, deforestation, climate change, increase in agricultural production, livestock, wildlife trade, and live animal trade, of course. So these are the same drivers that we see for many things like biodiversity loss, climate change as well, and so on. Spillovers are happening all the time. It's not a really rare event. What's really rare is for a spillover to spread. And we do certain things that are really probably not very smart, right? We bring live animals from the whole world, we mix them together at markets, and we allow them to exchange viruses. This is basically what you would call a gain of function without any control, right? You have the animals in the market, they're sharing excrements, they're sharing blood, saliva, and so on. Viruses will evolve, new viruses can emerge, and to make it even better, you keep a lot of humans in the same area. And we know that there were a lot of animals being sold in Wuhan, for example, at the market during the time of the outbreak. So what's happening is, normally, if you look here on the left-hand side, you would see there's a lot of barriers. It's really rare for pathogens to slip over from nature into humans. But when you create these kind of artificial encroached habitats or markets, for example, you remove many of these barriers. Now, let's just take 2 steps back. COVID-19, of course, is also an opportunity at an extraordinarily and unnecessarily high price. But it is an opportunity because it has shown us that this is just a symptom of an ailing planetary health. It's really reminded of this basic fact that our health is interconnected with the health of the environment and things and everything that is in the environment. And it does make it also clear that, yes, we're all grateful that we have a vaccine. It's extraordinarily important that we have multiple vaccines, but we're not going to solve this problem with a vaccine. We need to think about this on a completely different scale. There are also, of course, a lot of economic reasons why we need to think about this. The previous pandemics were in the area of tens of billions of US dollars. Now, that big black spot there that you see is the costs related to COVID-19. And now we're talking about tens of trillions of US dollars. So if there's nothing else beyond the 5 million dead plus hundreds of millions of people who have been infected, also global economy cannot subsist these outbreaks, these pandemics in this class. So we need to think about building back better, of course, but we need to do that by maintaining and protecting the environment. And there was just a nice paper from a colleague of mine, came out, Ari Banstan and his colleagues just published this in Nature 5 days ago. And they just showed that the costs, which would have been exorbitant if I'd said this to you in 2019, everyone would have fallen over laughing, $20 billion per year. Well, that's only a 20th at the low end of what pandemics cost every year, 1/20. Okay, so it's a good investment. Now, I'm a veterinarian. I like working and discovering new pathogens and describing these, trying to describe the practices about how they emerge. But what we really need to look at is who's paying for the costs of infrastructure? Who's paying for the costs of development, production, and waste? What are the health costs that are incurred by that? We need to look much more closely. How can we change these costs to make these externalities of trade and production into nature positive outcome? And as you know, the World Health Assembly is meeting at the moment, and they're going to develop a global treaty agreement on pandemic prevention. And we need to make we have to be very careful that this treaty is going to include prevention and not only preparedness. There's a lot of talk about preparedness, masks, oxygen, vaccines, but we need to talk about prevention at source in nature. I'm going to skip this for time. And I'd just like to show you this. This is the classic One Health Venn diagram that everyone's been using for the last 20 years. I think we really need to move on. We need to give this up. This is so oversimplified. And we need to think of a way of showing and integrating a One Health approach across all SDGs. But importantly, the SDGs that relate to an intact biosphere are foundational for our health and for the health of all. And so those need to be at the foundation of our reflections. So thank you very much. And I'll leave it with that. Thank you. So let me stop.
Thank you, Dr. Walter. ウォルツァーさんからは、感染症だけではなく生物多様性にも気候
Thank you. You have talked about not only the pandemic, but the nature of the approach relates to how it relates to various aspects of our society just beyond the pandemic.
Now I would like to introduce the next speaker, Ms. Teresa Mundita S. Lim, who is Executive Director of ASEAN Center for Biodiversity. The topic of the presentation is Biodiversity Mainstreaming, Strengthening One Health in ASEAN.
Thank you for joining us, Dr. Lim. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm actually going to follow through some of the points that were already raised by Dr. Chris Walzer earlier, talking about nature positive solutions. So, but my presentation will actually focus on the initiatives in the ASEAN, including the challenges and successes in mainstreaming biodiversity as part of public health action. First, let me talk about the biodiversity in ASEAN. The ASEAN is composed of 10 10 member states in Southeast Asia, and it hosts 18% of the world's biodiversity, despite only possessing 3% of its land area. The forests of ASEAN are considered one of the most biologically rich and diverse in the world, with the highest mean proportion of country endemic birds and mammal species, and the second highest proportion of country endemic vascular plants compared to other tropical regions of the world. This makes ASEAN one of the world's critical habitats, making it highly important to global environmental sustainability and stability. Some 37% of known species in the ASEAN are endemic to the region. The region has 3 of the world's 17 mega biodiverse countries, and 5 countries are in the Indo-Burma region, considered one of the most biologically important regions of the planet. The region in particular has an abundant and diverse species of bats, birds, and pangolins, which have been implicated as reservoir hosts of various diseases. We have in the ASEAN around 346 bat species and more than 2,000 migratory avian species. 3 of the 8 pangolins are also found in Southeast Asia. While the region possesses rich and unique biodiversity, it's also vulnerable to new and emerging diseases. Current studies indicate that indeed biodiversity appears to be associated with outbreaks of human infectious diseases. A country with high bird and mammal diversity likely also harbors a high number of vectors and reservoirs, and links to the diversity of human pathogens as well. At the regional scale, an increase in the incidence of infectious diseases correlates with a reduction in biodiversity. The ASEAN region is no stranger to disease outbreaks. So because of this species richness in the region, we are also no stranger to disease outbreaks. In 1996, and when I talk about disease outbreaks, it's not just with humans, as Dr. Chris Walzer mentioned earlier. So I'm also a veterinarian by profession. So in 1996, the Philippines went into panic mode when macaques started dying off in a number of primate facilities due to a hemorrhagic disease. A strain of the Ebola virus was later isolated as a cause of the high Macaca fascicularis mortality, and labeled as Ebola reston strain. So this Ebola reston strain was not fatal to humans, but it could cause fever and flu in humans, but it was very toxic and very fatal to the monkey population. So in 2008, this same virus was detected in routine screening of pig populations that were not manifesting signs of any disease. Despite the insignificant pathological impacts on the pigs, it was the fear of unknown that which is the substantial effect on the pork industry in the Philippines, and caused significant financial losses for the pig industry. Around $312,000 was estimated lost in just one piggery farm in the Philippines. And because of these losses, the government was prompted to initiate efforts to assess the origins of the disease. Because the disease was found in domestic animals and in wildlife, in monkeys, and also affected humans, a multidisciplinary team was established to investigate possible reservoir of the reston Ebola virus. In the study, some forms of the virus were detected in some insectivores and frugivore bat species. In 1998, the Nipah virus outbreak occurred in Malaysia, where pigs and humans were infected. Human infections occurred in slaughterhouse workers, where pigs were imported from contaminated areas. Flying foxes and small insectivorous bats were also identified as Nipah virus reservoirs. The infections are believed to be directly from bats with proven human-to-human transmissions. The emergence of the Nipah virus in Malaysia is believed to have been driven by the movement of fruit bats closer to domestic animal farms. In 2003, SARS broke out in Asia. In the ASEAN region, it spread rapidly to Vietnam, resulting to 63, resulting to human cases and deaths all over Southeast Asia. And in 2003, this prompted the heads of ASEAN governments plus China to meet in Bangkok, Thailand, and endorse a set of procedures to combat SARS jointly. The procedures were drawn out by the respective countries' health ministers who had met in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. So two simple strategies eventually was able to contain SARS in its detecting all the cases and protecting those at risk of infection from these cases. And then the H5N1 was also another zoonotic disease, the highly pathogenic influenza, also dramatically affected human health and economies in the ASEAN since its detection in 1997. It has been found to occur in a number of healthy-looking wild bird species, including the tufted ducks, which are also present in the region. Among the strategies that were adopted by governments is promoting the interface of animal-human health, joint surveillance, monitoring of wetlands and water birds, keeping poultry farms as far away as feasible from migratory bird watering areas, and stronger coordination across the AMS in the smuggling of wild birds and poultry. At the moment, H5N1 is now endemic in most of ASEAN countries, and it's under control. Ecological destruction and unsustainable consumption have entered humanity into an era of pandemics, according to the report of the IPBES. IPBES warned an estimated of 1.7 million currently undiscovered viruses are thought to exist in mammals and avian hosts. So there's a lot of these viruses that could still infect human beings, and so the past experiences on the epidemics in Southeast Asia may not be the last if we are to if we are to refer to this the science that there are still a lot of other viruses out there in the environment which could infect humans. So, but it goes to show that even before COVID-19, in the ASEAN, biodiversity and health have already been a strategic focus for the region because of our partially due to the region's experiences on managing the recent emerging diseases known to be zoonotic or wildlife in origin. So the ASEAN, because of these occurrences, I've mentioned some meetings in the region were conducted, and because of the COVID pandemic, ASEAN leaders and sectoral bodies have also made significant policy statements that demonstrate that the political resolve of the ASEAN to incorporate biodiversity in public health responses and regional development processes. So as early as February of 2020, ASEAN leaders already issued a statement on the region's collective response to what was initially reported as an outbreak of the new coronavirus disease. Other high-level meetings were also convened soon after to discuss more ways to respond to the pandemic. And in November 2020, at the 37th ASEAN Summit, the leaders endorsed the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, or the ACRF. and its implementation plan, which guides ASEAN towards post-COVID-19 recovery. The ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, or the ACRF, serves as our blueprint now for cross-sectoral and cross-pillar collaboration for recovery and resilience building. The ACRF underscores the importance of a robust cooperation and mechanisms at the regional level and aligning national and local priorities to promote nature-based solutions and to increase the region's resilience against future pandemics. Under the ACRF, there's actually a broad strategy 5, which takes into account nature-based solutions as part of the long-term recovery and reducing the risk of future pandemics. The ACRF highlights that ASEAN continuously promotes efforts to mainstream biodiversity across relevant sectors, while encouraging individuals and communities to become biodiversity literate to adopt behaviors that address the root cause of future pandemics and zoonosis. The ACRF likewise has given prominent roles to ASEAN centers to ensure the impactful implementation of the framework. These centers, specially mentioned, were the ASEAN Center for Sustainable Development Studies and Dialogue, the ACSDSD, and the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity. The ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, the ACB, is an intergovernmental organization mandated to facilitate cooperation among the member states of ASEAN, with the support of dialogue and development partners on the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity in the region. We work with the ASEAN member states in carrying out its integrated approach to tackle the drivers of loss of biodiversity in the region, which include addressing stressors such as habitat destruction and illegal wildlife trade, and which also Dr. Walser earlier pointed out, achieve multiple benefits or solutions to several other crises, not just biodiversity loss. So thus the ACB advocates the One Health approach, which recognizes the interrelatedness of human, animal, and ecosystem health. Under this approach, experts of related disciplines collaborate and share necessary information to address issues like food safety and control of zoonotic diseases. Conserving wildlife and their habitats through species-specific conservation actions, promoting urban biodiversity to build resilience, and enhancing regional and sub-regional synergies are necessary to fully implement the One Health approach in the ASEAN. Robust mechanisms for implementing wildlife laws that address illegal and unsustainable use of wildlife at the local, national, and international levels are favorable in keeping the species safe in their natural habitats, thus reducing contact of natural hosts with multiple varieties of other species, including domestic animals and humans, lessens opportunities for viruses to transform. Together with some of the ASEAN region's dialogue and development partners, we support the efforts of the ASEAN member states in ensuring that natural habitats of wildlife species are effectively managed through various programs, including one of our banner programs, the ASEAN Heritage Parks Program. The AHP program, being one of our banner programs in the ASEAN, epitomizes the ACB's fulfillment of its mandate. It recognizes the regionally important protected areas in the ASEAN and seeks to generate greater collaboration between the ASEAN member states in conserving important natural habitats and addressing new and emerging diseases at source. Under this program, and together with our development partners, we offer capacity development support for enforcement and wildlife monitoring and provide enforcement equipment to several ASEAN heritage parks and protected areas based on country priorities. The ACB also strengthens community-based monitoring for illegal activities through active local community engagement to complement national level enforcement actions. We promote citizen science and provide opportunities for relevant academic research to be translated into actionable areas on the ground. For instance, the ACB is working with local government units and non-government organizations for a project that aims to strengthen the capacity of community members on biodiversity research monitoring. And under this project, activities such as community-based biomonitoring and forest patrolling for threatened forest birds and others are being conducted, as well as establishing baseline information on migratory water birds and flying foxes and their habitats, and studies as well on the presence of on the movement of these migratory species across islands in the ASEAN. So, re-emphasizing that conserving wildlife and ensuring the integrity of their habitats is just the first step of addressing and preventing pandemics at source, cross-cutting initiatives should also be present. While conducting activities at the community level on environmental management, livelihood, and food security are vital, this effort should be complemented by synergies focused on mainstreaming biodiversity at the regional and sub-regional levels. This should also be placed in to strengthen the biodiversity health nexus. Recent discussions on the interconnectedness of biodiversity and pandemics help us to develop our framework of action for recovery and build resilience to future pandemics. This framework focuses on biodiversity and health communication, integration of biodiversity in the One Health approach, partnerships and network building, biodiversity and health research and capacity building, and working with the ASEAN member states in harmonizing plans, policies, and programs to align national biodiversity strategy and action plans with the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework. With this framework, we envision a pandemic-resilient ASEAN region that integrates biodiversity considerations and nature-based solutions in its COVID-19 recovery agenda and views it as an integral part of building resilience or building back better. The main objective of the framework is really to develop a biodiversity-focused recovery approach and build resilience against future pandemics. So the interconnectedness of health and biodiversity has been an important theme in various regional policy dialogues. We organized in Bangkok in 2016 the second ASEAN conference, and the session already explored the complex interlinkages between biodiversity, ecosystem services, and human health. Recommendations from this conference, such as capacity development, capacity building initiatives on health and biodiversity, peer learning, and regional exchange programs are already we are already in the process of carrying it out, also in line with the ACRF. In 2018, the ACB also collaborated with the CBD and the World Health Organization to convene a regional capacity building workshop on biodiversity and human health for the ASEAN region. The workshop brought together national agencies responsible for biodiversity and those responsible for health to mainstream biodiversity in national and regional public health and programs. In 2019, the ACB commissioned a study that looked at the low-hanging fruits from the 2018 Biodiversity and Health Workshop. So we built on the 2018 workshop and assessed the state of policies or the lack thereof in 10 ASEAN member states. The assessment looked at the nexus of biodiversity and health in One Health, food and nutrition, non-communicable diseases, traditional medicine, and biodiversity planning and health. Within these themes, the policy priorities, joint implementation possibilities, best practices in the region across sectors were identified. Using various platforms, we also have our communication, education, and public awareness campaign, and we continue to raise awareness and deepen understanding and appreciation of the nexus among human health, animal health, and the environment. So online events were conducted in the past few months, working across sectors and disciplines. We also engaged, high-profile celebrities in the ASEAN to launch our campaign to promote biodiversity in the ASEAN and mainstreaming of biodiversity across the different sectors. These awareness-raising initiatives are anchored on science-based decision-making processes, which the Center also support through regional tools such as the ASEAN Clearinghouse Mechanism and the ASEAN Biodiversity Outlook reports. In collaboration with the member states of the ASEAN, the ACB has published editions of the ASEAN Biodiversity Outlook, which are comprehensive regional reports that thoroughly detail the ASEAN state of biodiversity, along with key strategies and policy recommendations, including biodiversity health nexus. So as part of this effort to enhance ASEAN capabilities, we also have a study to consider the development of a surveillance mechanism that will emphasize monitoring at ecosystem, species, and genetics level. This mechanism will focus on wildlife-human interactions and viral spillovers to address zoonotic diseases at source, along with the mapping of threats and risks and tracking of transmission pathways. So in partnership with the EU, the ACB also has the Biodiversity Conservation and Management of Protected Areas in ASEAN project, which is also currently looking at the role, management, and challenges of wildlife rescue centers across ASEAN in the region. Of course, the wildlife rescue centers is increasingly also becoming crucial with the global efforts to combat illegal trade, wildlife trade, and successful confiscations of wildlife, their byproducts and derivatives. And again, also opportunity for species to interact with each other in an artificial environment. Recently, the ACB and the FAO, we signed a partnership with FAO to work together in strengthening capacities in mainstreaming biodiversity into health frameworks and systems. Under the agreement with FAO, a regional implementation plan, we will work together on a regional implementation plan that will complement existing cooperations among ASEAN and other relevant bodies. In the ASEAN, there are also country-level initiatives that take into account the role of biodiversity, wildlife, and nature in contributing to efforts to reduce risks of further diseases. Although this include policies and legislation on illegal wildlife trade and protection of animal welfare. Although these initiatives actually focus initially on the protection of biodiversity and animal welfare, eventually there's now a conscious effort that this also conscious awareness that these policies also contribute to addressing the issue of diseases and prevention of future pandemics. Indonesia, for example, has a criminal code that prohibits intentionally causing unnecessary harm to animals. This is Law 18 of 2009. Malaysia, on the other hand, has laid down a national strategic plan for animal welfare since 2012 and the Animal Welfare Act of 2015. Malaysia, through its wildlife disease surveillance program, also monitors wildlife diseases. And in addition, under their own One Health framework, the links between human, domestic, animals, and wildlife health sectors are now being coordinated through the Interministerial Committee on the Control of Zoonotic Diseases. In the Philippines, animal welfare is covered by an Animal Welfare Act, and there's also the Wildlife Resources Conservation and Protection Act in providing stronger protection for wild animals. The law prohibits killing or and destroying wildlife species and also destruction of habitats as well. The Philippine government also released an administrative order to operationalize an executive order to create the Philippine Interagency Committee on Zoonosis and mandates agencies such as the Department of Health, Agriculture, and the Environment and Natural Resources to work together. In Vietnam, COVID-19 response has been very effective and has established the Vietnam One Health Partnership for Zoonosis even before the outbreak. Its One Health approach has enhanced the country's capacity and preparedness against zoonotic diseases. And apart from its fast and effective immediate response, Vietnam has also issued an executive order to revise and update its laws on illegal wildlife trade and pandemic risks. So these are just some of the examples in the countries in the ASEAN member states, and of course our work is to coordinate the success, to share the successes and coordinate the best practices across the region. So I'm pleased to share that One Health will be one of the key topics of the upcoming 7th ASEAN Heritage Parks Conference, which will be hosted by Indonesia this year. The theme of the ASEAN Heritage Parks Conference will be Healing Nature and People, the role of ASEAN Heritage Parks in ecosystem protection and pandemic recovery. So in closing, allow me to say that in light of the new and emerging zoonotic diseases, it is really urgent to integrate biodiversity and wildlife components into disease control and systemic approaches and strategies. So with that, the theme of this year's ASEAN Summit, Addressing Challenges Together, presents an opportunity for the ASEAN to further strengthen institutional linkages and to work with partners across the sectors working on animal, human, and environmental health, even outside ASEAN, within and outside ASEAN. So thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity. We look forward to your ideas and insights.
Thank you, Dr. Lim. リムさんからは ASEAN の人獣共通
Thank you very much, Dr. Lim. Dr. Lim talked about zoonotic diseases and One Health approach in relation to biodiversity in ASEAN. Thank you very much.
Now let me introduce the 5th speaker from WWF Japan. The group leads Biodiversity and Public Sector Partnership Conservation Department, and Ms. Emiko Matsuda. She will give a presentation entitled Ecosystem Conservation by WWF in response to the One Health Joint Declaration. Ms. Matsuda, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. First, I would like to extend my appreciation for your invitation. I'm with WWF Japan. I'm with the Biodiversity and Public Sector Partnership Heads at Conservation Department. My name is Emiko Matsuda. I very much appreciate your invitation at this symposium. I'd also like to extend my appreciation to the Secretariat for running this symposium. With the Omicron variant, I'm sure there are lots of difficulties and had much difficulties making a decision. I would like to extend my appreciation for holding this symposium. As for the subcommittee meeting with Professor Okabe, we have been preparing for this over the past 6 months, so I'm very happy to be able to give a talk today. As for the theme of today, One Health and the Environment, WWF from the conservation of biodiversity, we have engaged in various activities to realize One Health. As Professor Rebecca Johnson and David Coleman that presented yesterday, and Dr. Lee, I watched their presentations. Everyone considered the environment very important. So from our perspective of encouraging or promoting the biodiversity, I found it very encouraging. My presentation has to do with One Health Symposium that WWF held last year. So including what was achieved, and also there is an opinion survey that was done. So I will also introduce the results and findings, and also going forward, the initiatives regarding One Health that WWF would like to pursue. I would like to talk about these topics. First of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about WWF. WWF is as shown on this map. We have activities in all the countries, in 100 countries where there are colors on the map. We are NGO that are engaged in these activities. The international office is located in Switzerland, but there are local offices in different countries, and they would take up the most important issue and challenges with priority. Also at WWF, we are pursuing global benefits rather than specific interests. I think that's quite unique. Thanks to everyone's support and cooperation, last year marked the 60th anniversary since the founding of the organization, and WWF Japan marked its 50th anniversary since the opening of the Japan office. This is due to everyone's support, so we'd like to extend our appreciation. WWF is engaged in activities in 4 categories, roughly speaking. Today, there was a presentation on from Ms. Morita. There's climate change and biodiversity on both fronts. We are engaged in various activities. Regarding climate change, the Paris Agreement implementation and the policy advocacy work is something we do, and also Japan Climate Initiative. This is for the corporates to promote activities. So it's an initiative targeting the corporates, but with other NGOs, we are engaged in various initiatives, and also science-based target setting or science-based target initiatives. We are promoting those activities as well. Apart from that, the conservation of wildlife and the forest and ocean resources conservation, and also there are several activities to create sustainable society. So several groups are engaged in various activities under these themes, especially the creation of supply chain without destroying forests and sustainable fisheries, ocean conservation project, and the measures against the ocean plastics, and the freshwater conservation project, and also interdisciplinary activities, the food and initiatives targeting corporates and sustainable finance. We have a financial group working on that as well. So as for the topic of One Health, WWF Japan's Wildlife Group and the Biodiversity Group, these groups are engaged in activities under the theme of One Health. In my presentation, I will go over the following 4 topics as shown as the table of content. One is WWF and One Health. As you know, One Health is a broad concept, so what is done in each of the regions can be quite different. So through the activities conducted by WWF, I'd like to touch upon some examples. Second is the opinion survey targeting the general public immediately after the outbreak of the pandemic. So I'd like to introduce some findings of the survey results. Thirdly, what was held last year, One Health Symposium, and the subsequent joint declaration. I will touch upon that. And lastly, what WWF is aiming for, and 2030 Nature Positive. I'd like to walk you through that in the end. As the first topic, which is on WWF and One Health, WWF is promoting One Health strongly across the globe, but depending on the region, what is done is quite different. For instance, in Africa, what's called landscape approach is used to implement the One Health approach. In Africa, with the increase in the number of population, is causing environmental degradation, loss of biodiversity, and the increased use of natural resources. Those are identified as challenges, and also there will be an increasing demand for food. So regarding these challenges, we are trying to resolve those while at the same time taking the approach of One Health. In Southeast Asia, UNEP's Ms. Yashiro from UNEP and Dr. Walter and Dr. Lim, as they talked about the use of wildlife. Taking that into consideration, we are focusing on illegal wildlife transactions. For instance, we are strengthening activities, countermeasures on the distribution channels, major transportation channels, and online trades, online transactions, and also the so-called money laundering gained in this wildlife trade. In order to prevent that, we are working with the relevant parties and authorities. What is gaining attention in this context is One Health. As Dr. Lim touched upon, the AMR, what was done under AMR is to be extended, especially in Southeast Asia. So the initiatives take with regards to the ecosystem will lead to the prevention of future pandemics. In Japan, unlike what is done in Africa and Southeast Asia, what is being pursued at our offices, the policy advocacy regarding wildlife trade for pet purpose. As you know, the interaction between human and wildlife is very much limited compared to other regions. On the other hand, there's use of wildlife for the purpose of pet. Dr. Rebecca Johnson presented yesterday the pets to be used positively to have interaction with humans. It's different from that. Wildlife is being exploited for the use by humans, which exhibits a bad way of use of wildlife. So we'd like to prevent that from happening as we engage in activities. In particular, such wildlife would be imported from abroad. So there are animals that are prohibited from importing because of the Infectious Disease Act. And then 90% of such animals are actually imported from Southeast or from Asian regions. So we are proposing we are engaged in dialogues with the stakeholders to come up with legal framework to address such issues. Now, on the opinion survey, which was done in 2020, the COVID-19 is considered to be or there are various studies of what the cause of COVID-19 is. And immediately after the outbreak of this pandemic, there was a survey done in 5 Asian countries. The opinion surveys are done by each of the government offices in Japan, but opinion survey across different countries is rarely done. This survey was done online, targeting Hong Kong, Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam, and Japan, and the respondents were general public. As for the questions asked, the questions were asked to see to what degree the COVID-19 is considered an important issue. And then there are questions about the concerns around the pandemic of COVID-19 and the impact of the pandemic on the daily lives. So those are general questions, but in addition to that, in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic, there were questions asked about regulating the markets that trade wildlife. One caution to be drawn is that this survey was taken immediately after the pandemic. This was done in March of 2020, from the 3rd of March to the 10th of March. It's been 2 years already. So if you are to conduct the opinion survey, the results may be different. But with that in mind, if you could please take a look at the following slides. I will draw your attention to one question. So in 12 months prior to March of 2020, there was a question asking the respondents to see if they know of anyone that purchased wildlife products. So those that responded saying that, yes, I have purchased or I know someone that purchased, that's shown in the dotted box. In Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam, the number ranged from 8 to 15% are saying yes. And then as to the question of what types of wildlife products were bought, it's products. So it could be live or dead products. So live birds, snakes, bats, civet cats, pangolins, turtles, and these animals were cited. As you know, COVID-19 virus is said to have come from bats. So considering that, and also pangolins mentioned, it's under CITES, Washington Convention, the trade of this animal is prohibited. So whether the trade took place across the border or not is not known, but what this animal is recognized as a species whose extinction is being a concern. And then on the right-hand side, the question is whether the respondent would support or not support the measures to close the illegal and unregulated markets handling wildlife. As you can see, close to 100%, 93% very likely support such measures. But compared to 4 countries, Japan's response is rather low. In general, open markets handling wildlife, there are no such markets. So this question to many Japanese was perhaps difficult to understand. So with that in mind, but then having said that, the reason why I showed these results is that, as I mentioned earlier, the wildlife that's coming to Japan come from Southeast Asian countries. So first, the sources of import need to be regulated, and that will lead to prevent the wildlife trade.
将来的なパンデミックを防ぐ
And
こ
of
との
course, it is probably a first step towards preventing future pandemics from happening.
でそれから最後のこのデータ
And the last set of data,
これはですね
this is on the top 3 route of trading. In many of those countries, they had their wildlife market. But now, if the market is closed, how would they buy? Where would they buy? So it's a tricky question. And as a result, in Myanmar, Thai, and Vietnam, they said they would get it from the overseas. So that is one thing that stood out in those 3 countries. And in Hong Kong and Japan and Vietnam, they said online. So that also stood out. So the online trading is very hard to control. So going forward, I know why it is difficult. We need to actually keep the traceability, improve the traceability, and try to really ban the illegal trading online. With that backdrop, the WWF Japan, a year ago, on February 13th of 2021, together with IUCN and Japan Real Conservation, we held One Health Symposium 2021. The purpose is to really deepen our understanding how the COVID-19 pandemic is closely related to environmental issues. And we also wanted to convocate some of the understanding that we have about infectious disease and biodiversity and One Health. So there are various people from WWF Japan. We had Imperial Highness Prince Akishino was available, and at the time was present. Also, the Ministry of the Environment, Shinjiro Koizumi was also there, and as a keynote speaker, Professor Yamaguchi from Kyoto University, and also Mr. Yamamoto from Mr. Tamura from Fukuoka Prefecture was also available. So there are various people and attending this meeting. We also had a video message from WHO UNEP Conservation on Biological Diversity, and also the Biodiversity Convention that UN is currently working on, and they had also sent in a video message to this conference. And in this symposium, there are various entities like Japan Medical Conference, Council, and we put together One Health joint declaration. So we acknowledge that a global expansion of human activity is causing the destruction of nature, such as deforestation, whereby driving the occurrence of emerging infectious disease. So we will call on the society to recognize the dangers caused by such environmental problems. So protecting the health of animals, we have so many different routes where we see exploitation of wild animals and wildlife. So that it's the protection of the health of animal and protection of the health of human. While we have an issue with lowering population, but there is an increase in population in African area. So we have to make sure that animals and human keeps the right distance. And that's for the protection of the health of animals. And protecting the health of human, we are putting together a national strategy on biodiversity, and there is a lot of discussion about healthy ecosystem. So while we do recognize the healthy ecosystem is closely connected to the physical and mental health and well-being of human beings. So we must make sure that we are able to solve various issues at the various level through the collaboration at various level. So WWF Japan, well, WWF, we are quite concerned about ecosystem conservation. So ecosystem, as you can see in the lower left, together with abiotic and component, there are all sorts of components that controls environment, like mangrove, ponds, and actually hosts habitat of its own unique habitats, and also human is also a part of this ecosystem. So people think school we get food, water, and other natural resource for free from the earth, from the environment. But at the same time, we have to maintain. We also receive various controlling, nature controlling service from the nature as well. All those things are given for free to our society, but they do actually serve as a basis to protect our lives. So just like One Health is supporting our entire life, ecosystem actually supports entire human activity and society. Now, because of the human activity, we are actually overusing the resource available, and we are exceeding the limit of what the planet can support. And that's what is depicted on the right-hand side. So we call the footprint the human actually lives on the planet is called ecological footprint. And it needs to actually balance with the supply available from the earth. It needs to be actually smaller than what is being supplied. But right now, the ecological footprint is much larger than what is actually available from the earth. So it is already unbalanced. Now, in order to support the world, we need to actually maintain our activity so that we only spend Earth worth of resource. But right now, in order to support all of human activities, we need 1.8 worth of Earth. So we are, in a sense, using up all of the savings that Earth has had. Now, if we continue to spend the way we do, we are going to use up everything that is available from the earth, and we are not going to be able to live the way we have. And actually, it's a group of small number of countries who is overspending. If the rest of the world live the way the Japanese people live, how many Earth do we need? 3 Earth. That's how you read this map. So if everyone wanted to live or lived as American, how many Earths do we need? We need more than 5 Earth to support such activities. So we are using resource from the world, resource of the environment, and we can actually confirm that from the biodiversity point of view. This is the Living Planet Report 2020. And you can see the Living Planet Index is calculated, and there is 4,400 different species, vertebrates, and 2,100 populations of vertebrates. And you can see by 2016, we only have 68% less than what it was back in 1970. So we need to make sure that we go back up and become positive. So as Dr. Walter mentioned earlier, we have to aim to be nature positive by 2030. This is where we are putting our efforts in. So we have to turn this trend back toward a positive trend. Reduce the natural habitat loss to zero species loss, and we have to reduce the footprint. And it has a lot to do with One Health activities. And I think all of you probably has a way to contribute to this effort. At the end, I'd like to talk about 3 points about nature positive 2030. We will continue to work on the conservation of ecosystem in under One Health, and we have to also understand understand the impact of Japan and the world's consumption on different ecosystem, including wildlife trading. And by reducing footprint, we can contribute toward the conservation of ecosystem and promote One Health. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you, Matsuda-san, Dr. Matsuda. So Dr. Matsuda talked about nature positive activity, how important they are through talking about WWF's aim for ecosystem conservation. So we had 5 lecturers, and we've actually provided some questions to the panel or the lecturers, and we'd like to receive some answers to the question and deepen the discussion that we've had so far. So, as for the first question, under the One Health, we've been working on AMR, and you've been actually successful in making some progress toward control of AMR. With the COVID-19, I think there's a larger expectation on you. So considering this current situation, what are your thoughts about the contribution you can make toward One Health?
私の方からまずはご指名
I would like to designate the speaker, if I may. I'd like to follow the order of the presentation. So first, Dr. Morita, if you could please address that question. Thank you very much. I'd like to address this first question. Well, I myself, in terms of research, I have been focusing on the climate change policies and science. Having said that, the concept of One Health is now getting broader and broader with the COVID-19 as a trigger. This is my feeling. On the other hand, the relationship and interaction between the human and the animals very important. That's clear. That is easy to understand and, when it is mentioned. But when it comes to what actions need to be taken, it is much more complex because there are different viewpoints and depending on countries, industrialized countries or developing countries and as well. I think it might be related to the next second question as well, but if we can understand better what concrete approaches should be taken and followed, I think that will allow everyone to move on to toward the next step, next phase from this current phase of a quite abstract only concept. And then I myself am deeply involved in the decarbonization discussion. And so I am from an environmental protection area as an expert. I think that the perspectives that we do have in this particular area are slightly different from those who are experts of the biodiversity. So how to align different perspectives and how to go across different sectors will be very important in my feeling. Thank you very much, Dr. Morita. Very important suggestions. One is the concreteness and specificity of One Health approach as a concept, but more specificities. And Dr. Morita said also that when we come One Health, the biodiversity easily comes to mind and with a clear image, but then how to connect that to other sectors, particularly environment and protection, that will be one of the important keys to the solution. Now, I would like to ask Dr. Walter to address the same first question, perhaps from the same or different viewpoint, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So I obviously agree with the was said previously, absolutely. Now, from my point of view, one thing that we do have to understand is that we spent, hundreds of billions of dollars on vaccines and masks and oxygen and all the rest of it. But the truth is the pandemic is still ongoing. And so the painful lesson that we all have to accept is that once pandemics have spilled over and have spread, they're extraordinarily difficult to stop. So I think there's urgent action is needed in 5 key areas. That's what I would say. So I think shutting down or strictly regulating wildlife trade and markets, especially of live animals in the large urban centers, that needs to stop. That makes absolutely no sense. There's no reason for that. It's a luxury business. It's often an illegal business. That needs to stop. We got to reduce or stop deforestation. I use the word reduce, but actually we need to stop deforestation. Absolutely. We need to improve human and livestock healthcare in tropical regions at the front lines where spillover happens. We saw Dr. Lim brought up the classic Nipah example, livestock, human health at the front lines of spillover. We need to strengthen that. We obviously need to strengthen biosecurity in animal husbandry. Avian influenza comes to mind immediately. This is something we really need to work on. And then on the other side, we also need to increase our surveillance of novel pathogens. That means we need to move on from just looking for known pathogens to start looking at ways of tackling new and emergent pathogens, which we don't know at the moment. I'd say those are my 5 points. Thank you.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. Dr. Walter mentioned 5 specific and concrete areas of actions which are needed. Dr. Lim, do you have any views to share with us in this regard, please?
Yeah, thank you. I think that science and technology has accelerated through the years, in the past decades, and especially during the time of pandemic. And observations and evidence already points out the links of new and emerging diseases with nature. And I think we need to look at addressing One Health provides that opportunity. It provides a platform for cross-sectoral collaboration. And I think that's all the speakers mentioned cross-sectoral collaboration, the need for because the COVID has the circumstances that brought us to where we are in COVID is multidimensional in character. It's complex. No one sector can do it alone. Can address One Health. One Health is comprised of several of the environment pillar, as well as the human health and animal health dimensions. And so I think what is important now is how to encourage and how to urge cross-sectoral collaboration. There is promise because the One Health is already there, but we need to be able to have more policy frameworks that will institutionalize eventually One Health and institutionalize that cross collaboration among different sectors to ensure that we will be addressing the problem as a whole in a holistic approach and in an integrated approach.
はい、ありがとうございます。リムさんの方からは、非
Thank
常
you
に
very much. Dr. Lim talked about the acceleration of the development of the science and technology, which is promising, which is giving a hope. So that makes me happy. But at the same time, Dr. Lim talked about the importance of a cross-sector and a multi-sector approach and then cooperation, not only in the area of animal health, but also other sectors. I believe that science as a whole can also support and promote that approach. Ms. Matsuda, please. Thank you very much. From myself, well, not much is left for me to mention because another speakers already addressed quite comprehensively the question. But compared to last time of this One Health conference, I think much has changed. That is to say that now many international organizations are focusing on One Health, and then global initiatives motivation is more advanced than the last time. So various approaches and initiatives are needed, and then cross-sector cooperation is important and necessary. And in that regard, high-level commitment is very important and essential. Well, Japan is part of G20 and G7 as well. That type of high-level commitment is essential so that there is a further dissemination of the perception and understanding about the importance of the One Health, so that at the regional, national, community, as well as individual levels, approaches and initiatives will be taken going forward. That is very important in my view. Thank you. Thank you very much. So the importance of high-level commitment was pointed out. I think that is in line with what Dr. Lim said, i.e. the necessity of the institutionalization of One Health and the institutional framework for the promotion of One Health. Now, next question. Importance of environment for the sake of One Health was emphasized by all of the speakers so far in this session. So strengthening initiatives in environmental area is an idea. I would like to ask the next question. In order to promote environmental conservation and protection, we are facing a certain number of challenges currently, for sure. So I would like to hear your views about those challenges facing us in terms of environmental protection. Can we ask Dr. Morita as a first speaker once again? Yes, thank you very much. For myself, when we discuss about health, environmental aspect is now much more emphasized. Well, in the area of climate changes, there have been a lot of scientific findings, IPCC's contribution, and a lot of discussion. So environmental has been much discussed in that area of climate changes. So we shouldn't just start environmental discussion from the scratch in One Health, because we cannot afford to wait for that much time. So we have to capitalize on existing findings and knowledge, because we know that it takes a lot of time for the outcome to be available. If we wait for the outcomes by doing the discussion from the scratch, and there will be never policy framework in a specific way. So policy discussion and scientific discussion need to be linked with each other. Now, more knowledge sharing and mutual education, wherever it can be possible, should be done to find out concrete solutions.
That was a very important comment. We are researchers, so we tend to continue with the research, but to make good use of what is already available so that we can have immediate and fast solutions. The importance of that was touched upon. What about you then, Dr. Walter?
Yeah, so I can't emphasize more. I'm so completely aligned with Dr. Morita on this one. We can't, we love to do more research and more studies, but just to put it bluntly, we don't have the time. We need to move on and use the information we already have and employ a precautionary principle. We already know that the environment is essential. That being said, we do have to come up with some measures to actually say, what is environmental health? We talk about environmental health. You can have fun and Google environmental health. You will find, thousands of people discussing what that means. So we do need to get some data and some clear guidelines what that means, so that we can help and support policymakers and decision makers in taking those high-level decisions we talked about before. So as researchers, we really do have to support and think more about what environmental health means. But we got to get on with it. I agree completely.
私の方から一つ、ウォルツァーさんにご質問させていただいてもよろしいでしょうか。
If I could ask one question, Dr. Walter, in my area, the conservation of biodiversity in forests. Ecosystem health is to be taken towards sustainable forests. So sustainable forests are sound forests. That discussion has been going on. On the other hand, from One Health perspective, do you think there are differences? Do we need to incorporate or do we need to take new initiatives? Do you see the need for that?
Yes, I think, this is a really hot topic, of course, the whole concept of sustainable. What is sustainable? We saw the slides first. I don't know, in the US here, they're using 5 planets. Others are using 3 planets. Obviously, we're using too much. It's not sustainable. We have this whole discussion about sustainable trade and things like that. Basically, I think we need to acknowledge most of the things we do are not sustainable. So the management of these forests needs to address all these crises at the same time. We need to address the climate change, the decarbonization, the drawing down carbon. We need to address the health aspects, be that pathogen spillover or clean water, clean air, but then also the inequity problems, the indigenous peoples and local communities who are absolutely dependent on these forests and the species that live therein, not the people on some city and who just like to eat wildlife because they enjoy it in Africa or in Asia. And then obviously the last one, the biodiversity loss, as you've pointed out yourself. Yeah, it's a difficult one. I think we're all going to be challenged for longer to tackle that one.
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to ask Dr. Lim for her opinion, if you could share with us.
Yes, I think the challenges. I think one of the challenges is really the breaking the silo mentality. There's a tendency of for the sectoral thinking, and your priority is within your sector. And the COVID pandemic has actually presented, has somehow catalyzed this working together across the sectors, but we still need to do more, because we need to break down that mindset that the health will work, the public health works within its own circle. So I think we need more communication strategies that should not be compartmentalized. We need to communicate the science that's already out there, to see how to identify that these are all interconnected, and so therefore the approach, especially at the at the higher level decision making, is that for everyone to coordinate. And I think that's one challenge that we need to break down. Also, the lack of valuation for nature, nature's contribution to improve the well-being and health of humanity, and also contribution to livelihoods. This is also very challenging, and it's something that we still need to a lot of studies and research still needs to be undertaken to overcome this challenge of putting the appropriate value to our natural resources that will take into account their contribution to an integrated health approach, addressing health issues and other crises, and climate change as well, especially in this time.
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. There were 2 very interesting points identified and raised by the 2 speakers. Different stakeholders working together, the importance and the necessity for that was raised. That is something that we sort of knew from before, that it needed to happen. And we were sort of engaged in conversation along those lines, but we never were able to resolve those. So under the concept of One Health or health, from such perspective, perhaps we can bridge together and have different sectors work together. Maybe it can become like a hub to allow such intersectoral collaboration. And for that to happen, we as researchers will have to make further effort. One other point, and the evaluation of nature, that is also a very difficult issue, a challenging issue. So in ASEAN, do you have any specific efforts in that direction of valuation of nature?
Yes, thank you. We've had some exercises in each ASEAN member states, and of course we have papers that are available for on that, and this has been translated also as payment for ecosystem services for ASEAN heritage parks, for example, fees so that they can estimate the fees that can be charge, for example, for use of certain services from the ASEAN heritage parks. But so far, for One Health, there's still much to be done on valuing the contribution of resources, because there are several dimensions again that needs to be taken into account. And also not just the green environment, but we talk about the brown and the blue environment as well, like marine and coastal ecosystems. They're how and of course, to be able to make the actual valuation, you also need the research of the actual services that can be derived by each and every components of the ecosystems.
はい、ありがとうございます。生態系サービス、この
Thank you very much. So the evaluation of ecosystem services, it's quite challenging, but more needs to be done. From my perspective, before we get to the ecosystem services regarding natural capital, by having in-depth thought, especially when it comes to health, maybe the natural capital is not very much linked yet. So maybe we need to have an in-depth view on that. Sorry, lastly, any thoughts, Ms. Matsuda? Thank you. So in order to extend the approach of One Health to the environment, the challenges are, as was brought up by Ms. Morita, Dr. Lim, Dr. Walter, but a cross-sectoral conversation is important. For instance, One Health was talked about in zoology and medicine. So the discussion, I think, is still skewed to that, or very much heavily concentrated on those. And as to whether it is extended to environment, there's still a question mark. So we need to have common terminology that is used in different sectors. Otherwise, we can't engage in effective communication. So that's one point. So cross-sectoral conversation is needed. So that's one point. Another one is related to natural capital. Currently, there's the silo mentality, and we are trying to do that across the sector. So there's a need to have a vertical linkage across different sectors. So natural capital is something that corporates would have to think about. But when we speak to corporate community, they say consumers will have to understand.
That's true. Corporates, they are pursuing for profits. So the consumer's intention, consumer's behavior actually drives what is being produced by the companies. And who are the consumers? We, those of us. So, it goes back to this vicious cycle. Sustainability works that way, I guess. So while we talk about horizontal cross-sector, we need to think about vertical cross-sector as well. And we really do need to understand how we can actually overcome that. And that's something that we need to learn. Yeah, I think there are various difficult issues, but so we have to really overcome the vertical sectionalism, and we need to really have a stronger horizontal linkage. That's the way Japanese people always talk about vertical and horizontal. But anyway, if you think about environmental issues, we've got governments, research institutions, and medical sector, and a small global organization and small local organizations, and there are also NGOs. So there are so many different stakeholders, and they all have different roles and responsibilities. What is expected of them? So what do you think about that? The responsibility of all these different organizations. Morita-san, please. Thank you. From the speech lecturers of all of the four lecturers, I've learned a lot today. And I actually presented Fukuoka, a local prefecture in Japan. But, we always talk about SDGs at the prefecture level. And we need to, of course, go forward net zero, carbon zero on the prefecture level. So there are so many things that requires cross-sectional efforts. And now One Health, we need to also think about the cross-sectional efforts. I think local municipals are probably overwhelmed by all those sectional requirements. And we have a lot of agenda on the COVID requirement as well. So if you think about it, all those governance, all those requirements, what do we need to? I think we need to think about what needs to be the elements of the agenda. So if someone can actually put together a picture for each of the stakeholders to do, I think experts on One Health needs to really come up with agenda each of the entities can focus on. Otherwise, they will not be able to really learn about what they need to focus on. Dr. Walter, this is probably opinion for you, a good question for you. What is your thoughts?
Yeah, so we're getting into as in English, they always say, it's the elephant in the room, right? These are the things that are really, this is the crux. And Dr. Matsuda already brought it up, the consumer and who's responsible. I personally, honestly, I have a real problem by always looking at it down the consumer, the individual, because that would sort of imply that businesses and corporations are just producing things and it's our free choice if we want to buy the 15th iPhone 27 or whatever it is. We all know that we're weak, we have no choice. Basically, we're being driven. And so I think there's a corporate responsibility, and I know it's not in your question here, who's working there, but I just wanted to reiterate that we do have to think about our economic theory and how we're going to continue, because otherwise we'll keep spending these planets. That's not going to work. But one of the things specific to your question, how does everyone work together? I think one of the things we've neglected is the funding streams. So when these sectors are supposed to work together, we underestimate that they're actually competitors. And I think a really good example is the tripartite plus. You have the OIE, the FAO, UNEP, and I forgot someone. Who did I forget? I forgot someone. I forgot. Oh, the WHO. Yes. Gosh, I forgot WHO. But they're competing, of course, especially, the OIE and the FAO are always competing in the same area, UNEP maybe as well. So we do also have to provide transsectoral funding schemes. And I think that works everywhere, from the prefecture, from the city level, all the way up into the multilaterals. So that would be, I think, one of the most important things we need to think of. How do we fund these so that they're not in competition with each other? Thank you.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Thank you very much. Lim-san, 付け加えるような
Is there anything that you'd like to add? If there is any, I mean, if you have a different opinion, that's fine as well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with the funding stream that was mentioned by Dr. Walzer. Yeah, so I mean the donor institutions or even banks should start thinking about multiple benefits when they think of funding certain projects, and of course make sure that nature is also integrated into the into the equation. It's also important to have the conscious this awareness of the interconnectivity of all of the aspects that comprise One Health, of course. And again, I talk about multiple benefits. There are certain projects or activities, perhaps like the local government units can think, if they think of separate activities, then they feel that it becomes a burden. But if they think about one activity that can provide address several benefits, then maybe that's easier for them. Like for example, making several plans and programs for each pillar of One Health becomes more burdensome than thinking of it in an integrated manner. So perhaps that's also something that can help ease the pressure for local governments and for other stakeholders. And they're also, and working together is also important. There's special, like small organizations would have their specialized concern, and they should not be thinking that they need to address everything by themselves. Experts working together, experts on marine, for example, and experts on finance, and experts on forest, they can focus on their expertise, but start to think about opportunities where their interest will cut across each other. So there must be some opportunities as well for those exchange of information on One Health.
はい、ありがとうございます。大変重要な意見が続いていますが。
Thank you. We have a series of very important questions, Mr. Casters. Master-san, I hate to give you the very final round every time, but please. So as NGO, I've been working as an NGO, and I shared some of the survey result we had. And there was one slide that I didn't share with you because of the time. It was about One Health. What is the expectation? So this is just regular citizens being asked about One Health. And they had, of course, government and medical institution and local governments. And they ranked high, but NGO ranked very low. And I was really sorry. And Dr. Walzer, if you saw that result, you'd be really discouraged as well, in a sense, because people are not really aware of what contribution they're making, especially when you think about One Health, people don't think about the environment, they think about medical institutions and such. And there's another survey done by Global Scan. When you think about sustainability, what are the organizations that you have expectations on? And then the top was NGO. So it's a global research. So I can't compare the two easily, but it's not applicable to Apple. But when it comes to sustainability, they think of NGO at the top. So, and that I was happy to see that, but WWF especially is really working on environmental conservation, and especially ecosystem. And of course, health of livestock and animals are also important factors for us. And of course, sustainability is another very important issue for us as well. Thank you. So One Health, I think we need to really enhance the importance of the environment aspect of One Health. So it needs to be interdisciplinary, and it needs to be multidisciplinary as well, so that we can really solve it. So this is something that we need to really transmit to the world, that there is important environmental aspect to One Health.
So last question from a little bit different perspectives. General public is also part of the audience of this One Health International Forum and Conference. So how general public citizens can contribute to One Health? Can you give advices to general public from your expert position, please? I'd like to ask Dr. Morita first, please. Well, I thought about business corporations, and can I address the question from that perspective? Yes, of course. So I talked about the ESGs and the business corporations, and I conducted some survey, and I know that some of the Japanese corporations, business corporations, started to invest into One Health. Well, of course, only the knowledgeable businesses are doing such investment currently, but the sustainable finance and that type of ESG fundings are part of ongoing stream and trends currently. So those broad interests can also build the stories so that One Health can be also connected to the business activities of the corporations, so that more investments will be channeled into One Health, possibly. But on the other hand, in the terms of the protection and fight against an infectious diseases, and it takes a lot of scientific knowledge in order to do that properly, because investments can be done with a good intentions, but that can be used wrongly because of a misunderstanding or lack of good knowledge. So channeling good knowledge and communicating them to businesses is very important as well. Thank you very much. I am a researcher of the ecosystem, so I would like to be mindful of that. Dr. Walter, can you address this question, please?
Yeah, and if I may just flip the question first, just flip it upside down and say, one of the things I think I've learned in the last 24 months dealing with this is that we as scientists, we need to learn to communicate better. We need to communicate in a transparent manner, and we need to make sure that the public understands us. We need to take time to speak to the public. On the flip side, of course, when we do that effort and we get better at it, we do also expect the public to listen to us and reflect on what we say. So we need to move beyond these highly polarized societies in which we are. But it's up to us as well. We've done sometimes a very bad job at communicating.
はい、研究者は得てして専門用語に
Indeed. Experts and scientists stick to jargon or specific to specialized terminology, not very easy to understand oftentimes. It is true. So in communicating to general public, we have a mission to communicate in an easy to understand manner what can be done. I think that's an important role. And Dr. Lim, please.
You're muted.
Taking off from the sharing knowledge to the public, the public should be able to react to it in such a way that they would adopt more holistic and more healthy lifestyles Also, of course, their consumption patterns must be must also be changed so that it could be more it could be more sustainable. And well, as citizens, they can also be, as some of our projects have proven, they, on citizen science, they can also be able to support the sharing of information on the field from the ground that can be analyzed eventually on how much they can support the gathering of information. So the participation of citizens in the science, adopting healthy lifestyles, and then of course they should also be more discerning. There's the social media nowadays churns several information, as we know, and I think this the public should be able to discern the what is what is fake news and what is actually what can be validated. So I think they should be more discerning on the information that is being shared in social media when it comes to One Health as well. So yeah, so I think those can be contributions from the public to promote One Health better.
はい、ありがとうございます。確かにワンヘルスをよく知っている人たち
Yes,
から
indeed. For those who know well one's health, well, it is obvious that One Health is so good. We take it for granted as a knowledge and understanding, but this is still a very new approach, which needs to be much better disseminated broadly across the world and the society and communities. I think that's what we can say. Matsuda-san, Ms. Matsuda, please. Yes, indeed. Well, on behalf of WWF, I would like to say the following. We have been conducting many campaigns oftentimes so that our activities can be better known by the general public, by the citizens, and also so that citizens can support our activities. And when it comes to ecosystem conservation, protection, and the biodiversity, those topics, they are not very well understood yet by the citizens, as opposed to climate changes, which are quite familiarized by the general public. So what terminology is the proper one to use when we talk about biodiversity and ecosystem conservation? Dr. Waltz talked about communication, better communication skill. I think that's a forever challenge for us to find out the appropriate language to talk to general public. Well, in my case, I would like to tell the citizens to look at the materials, the things that they have in front of them, and to imagine where that it comes from. I have a piece of paper, for instance, just in front of me. Where does this piece of paper come from? Probably this piece of paper was made using resources from Southeast countries. My iPhone that I'm having in front of myself, where does it come from? Well, you probably using resources, mineral resources from other countries and manufactured and sold in Japan, because Japan can never manufacture iPhone devices with not domestic resources only. Same is true for food. Well, it may cause a lot of it may be provocative to say this, but when you eat this food, it uses a lot of land somewhere. It takes a livestock farming, animals. So what about the agricultural land, forest environment in those countries from where this food is coming from to on my table? So thinking about that way, about the things and the material that they are in front of citizens, they can understand better that all those resources come from other countries in a transborder way. They can, in doing so, think of countries away from their own lives, use daily settings. I think that can help citizens to better think about those topics of biodiversity, environmental protection. But it is easy to say, but it's much more difficult to make this message penetrate clearly to general public. Well, WWF is thinking hard about it in order to create a good catch copy or good phrases to communicate them. We would like to continue to do so. Thank you. Thank you very much. So this discussion is in a very interesting direction. I would very much hope to continue more, but then it is sadly time to stop our session officially. From now onwards, we would like to interact on an individual basis with all of you. Thank you so much for your very important insight and the suggestions on One Health initiative strengthening should go beyond the approach and framework of One Health per se. It can go much farther than, and then everyone, not only a scientist, not only a researchers, not only a citizens, all of the citizens need to transform their behaviors in a positive way so that healthy and sustainable society can continue to strive. With that hope, I would like to conclude this session and today's forum. Thank you very much for your participation for many hours.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Be safe.
ありがとうございました。以上をもち
Thank you very much. With this, we end the subcommittee 3 environmental protection.